Bienvenida to Latina Literati. If you enjoy amazing places, interesting books, interesting people and ideas, then this is the channel for you. And today we're in Vieques, a magnificent island in the Caribbean. It's one of 43 islands that make up the Puerto Rican archipelago. In Puerto Rico, there are 3 islands that are inhabited. The main island of Puerto Rico, Vieques, and Culebra. And today we are with you in Vieques. Even getting there is an adventure. You have to take a ferry in a place called Ceiba. And the online ticketing is not always up. And when you get there, you have to figure out when is the first available ferry ticket to go and when is the first ferry ticket to return, because they're not always available on the same day. So lots of adventures to tell you about, but of course, we like to begin in the beginning. So we know that about 2,000 years ago, at least 2,000 years ago, South American indigenous native peoples arrived in Vieques, probably in canoe. And as you can see here on the map, Puerto Rico is very close to South America. I mean, it just kind of hangs right above Venezuela. It's amazing how close it is. And so you can see how following the little islands all the way up, you would eventually get to Vieques. So about 2,000 years ago, they know at least indigenous native peoples from South America arrived in Vieques and were there until 1492. And you can guess what happened. Christopher Columbus actually landed in Puerto Rico and immediately enslaved the indigenous people. I wish I had a different story to tell, but I feel like every story, it's just a repeat of the last one. The indigenous people were enslaved, and many did not survive the brutality of the conquest. And soon after that, enslaved people from Africa were brought over to work agriculture, mostly sugar, but some other products like coffee. But really, really terrible conditions. It's said that in 1816, Simón Bolívar visited Vieques. And so he was in a Caribbean tour to gather support for his efforts to liberate South America from the Spanish. So as you recall, the Spanish-American War in 1898, Spain refused to give both Puerto Rico and Cuba the freedom promised to them and handed over the islands to the United States. And so the United States has been occupying Puerto Rico for a very long time. Over 100 years, 125, let's say. And so it's the longest colony in this hemisphere. And you're going to hear that a lot. Again, I wish I had a different story to tell. But Vieques is a beautiful island. Unfortunately, 60% of it was used for 60 years by the U.S. Navy as a bombing practice. And so missiles and bombs were blown up throughout the island. So you can imagine what that meant for the people who lived there. It's quite noisy and scary and polluted. And so as many as 30% of the inhabitants claim that they are that there's a direct relationship between the cancers that they suffer and the other ailments because they have been exposed to so many of the toxins that were part of what goes into the atmosphere, what goes into the air when bombing occurs. Now, thankfully, in 1999, unfortunately, there was a man who was killed. David Sanas was a native of Vieques, and he was killed by a stray bomb. And that just had the entire island in an uproar, and not just Vieques, but obviously the main island. And so there was a huge push to get the Navy out. And the Navy did leave in 2013 and turned over the parts of the island that they used for bombing practice to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. What they did not do was clean up what they left. So the island is actually off limits because it's quite contaminated. But the parts that aren't off limits, the beaches, are really beautiful white sand beaches. And at any time you think that Jack Sparrow is going to show up because it is so pristine, so beautiful, and the waters are just turquoise waters, really, really beautiful. So we took the ferry over, and we had lunch at a wonderful cafe called Nativo, and the town of Isabela, which is the main town in Vieques, has a very colonial feel to it. And we found out why the chicken crossed the road in Vieques. Why the chicken crossed the road in Vieques? To watch the roaming ponies. And there are these ponies all over the place. And we asked about them. Who do these ponies belong to? And everybody gave us the same answer. As long as the horses do not get into trouble, they have an owner. As soon as they get into trouble, they no longer have owners. So it's amazing. They absolutely have no fear. So it's crazy to see all these horses acting like they were, I don't know, dogs. They just wait at the doors of restaurants because they've grown accustomed to having rice and beans served to them. So grass is not enough for the ponies of Vieques. Really amazing. We saw them and all over the island, and also on the beaches, just kind of hanging out on the beaches and eating different types of grasses along the roadsides. Beautiful, beautiful to see them. And so we heard a lot of lore that sometimes in the full moon, the males gather on the beach to kind of can have contests with each other to see who will take the herd of the other. I don't know if it's true or not, but we heard all sorts of stories about the horses in Vieques that roam around the streets and the beaches. But the beaches are beautiful. The best known is Esperanza. The best is Esperanza and Sun Bay. And before I leave even Isabela, I just wanted to mention that Nativo has these tortitas de calabaza that are the combination of platanitos and churros. Imagine that combination. Well, that's what you get at Nativo. Really, really delicious little tortitas de calabaza, or pumpkin little tarts that are sweet. So we spent the day in Vieques, beautiful sun, beautiful beaches. And so really, really recommend it. If you're in Puerto Rico, take a day to go to Vieques. Buy your tickets early because, again, speaking to different people in Puerto Rico, we were told that the government is now using ships that are much smaller than there used to be, so that there's the ships are really full, that the ferries that go back and forth, and people that we spoke to there said that the ferries used to be bigger, and so I guess as a cost-cutting measure, the ferries are smaller, and therefore that means that there's less possibility of getting on one. Residents are given preference, as they should be, and so you'll see the residents with huge shopping carts getting on the ferry because there isn't a lot of variety. I mean, there's some stores, but not too much on Vieques, and so people go to the mainland to shop, especially for bigger items and electronics. So you'll see people on the ferry with all sorts of things. So it's pretty amazing being on the ferry because the waves, literally, if you're sitting inside, are above you. And it's a strange feeling to be in a ferry with the waves kind of lapping the sides of the ferry above you. But it's a relatively, at least when we took the ferry, it was a relatively calm ride. It's about an hour each way. So when you're planning, ensure that you take that time into consideration. You can park your car where the ferry departs, or take an Uber or whatever, and get dropped off. So Vieques is an island that I think has a lot of potential, and I've been told that a lot of people from the mainland have moved there, buying up properties because it's very tranquil. As I said, it's very beautiful, and it has that small town feel that you would feel in a small Caribbean island. But we definitely saw a lot of tourists. In fact, we were told that this is the most amount of tourists in Vieques and Puerto Rico for several years. I mean, we're talking, it's more than pre-pandemic numbers. And so everything is... the ferry was full and all the restaurants were full, and so the taxi driver seemed quite happy because they had a lot of work. But I don't know how the residents feel about so many people visiting Vieques at any one time. So there are a lot of interesting places to visit in Vieques, great hotels. We saw a couple of really good-looking hotels that we would have stayed, but we didn't plan to stay. We just went for the day. So highly recommend Vieques, beautiful beaches, great people, good food. So go there if you can, or when you can. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey and for being part of the community that enjoys hearing about all of these places. And of course, now we come to my favorite part of the video, book recommendations. And I thought since Dia de Reyes had just passed, Epiphany or the Three Kings Day, that I would start with a children's book. And the children's book is called Schomburg, the Man Who Built a Library. And if you haven't heard about Arturo Schomburg, he's an amazing intellectual, just a wonderful, beautiful mind, very avid collector of books, of artwork, of poetry, of all sorts of things. And when it is no longer feasible to keep all these things in his home, he goes to the New York Public Library and establishes what at that point in time was called the New Negro Project. And it just has amazing collection of Afro Latino authors. And so this is a wonderful way to introduce children to an iconic intellectual from the Caribbean. So Schomburg, the Man Who Built the Library. And as always, I'll include links below if you'd like to order the books. Obviously, your library or your local bookseller are always the best place to find books. But if that's not available to you, I always include links in the description box for your consideration. So the second book is by journalist and author and professor Juan Gonzalez. And it's called Harvest of Empire. And it's a great introduction to the role of the United States in the Caribbean as well as Latin America. And so there are many classics in this vein. But this is one of the more recent books, and he's done a fabulous job of documenting all of the different interventions and coups and things that have led up to where we are today. Because you can't speak of people wanting to leave their home without speaking of the history that has led them to want to leave their home. And many times it is absolutely inextricably intertwined with U.S. foreign policy and U.S. economic policy. And so really recommend, if you're interested in the Caribbean, to read Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez. The book that is, the third book that I'm going to recommend that is specifically about Puerto Rico is by Nelson Dennis, also a very good Puerto Rican writer, and it's called War Against All Puerto Ricans. And so there's a whole history of how the U.S. has treated its longest colony and what it has meant for the people of Puerto Rico in the island and in the diaspora to have the continued conditions of a colony in Puerto Rico. So War Against All Puerto Ricans is a really good insight into some of the initiatives, things like forced sterilizations. Thousands and thousands of women were lied to in Puerto Rico and were sterilized by force. The pineapple industry in Hawaii wanted workers, and so again lied to the Puerto Ricans, brought them across the rail to San Francisco, where they actually, many of them got off and refused to get on the ships, and established the oldest Puerto Rican club, is the one in San Francisco. But those that went to Hawaii were basically kept in slave conditions. Again, they were lied to, and they were used by the pineapple corporations to work the fields. There are a lot of very interesting situations where the Puerto Ricans have been used again and again and again by U.S. economic interests. And of course, Puerto Rico has lost more soldiers. So in exchange for U.S. citizenship, there's a lot of recruitment by all of the military branches in Puerto Rico. And when you speak to cab drivers and people there, almost all of them will tell you, my son, my nephew, my brother, me, we all served. And all of the towns have a statute to those who have served, especially those who served in Vietnam. But Puerto Rico, compared to all other states, compared to the 50 states, has lost more people in every war that the U.S. has sent Puerto Ricans to. So the greatest sacrifice is made by Puerto Ricans for the United States. And it's a very unfair relationship. It's a relationship that is one-sided. And it's one that we're going to talk about a lot because we spent several weeks here and getting to really talk to the people of Puerto Rico and hear their perspective has been very, very moving and eye-opening, and it is to them that I dedicate this video. So again, thank you so much for coming to the end of the video. Please subscribe, like, tell us what you'd like to hear about in these videos. We'd love to share things with you, but we'd like to share ideas and books that you're interested in. So let us know down below. Please comment. Thank you so much. And as always, les deseamos mucho cariño, mucho salud y mucho amor. Muchas gracias.